All right, let's jump right in. We're about to tackle one of the biggest, most mind-bending ideas in all of philosophy. I'm talking about Plato's Allegory of the Cave. It's a story, right? But it's one that's been messing with people's ideas of reality for, just about 2,500 years.
So let's start with a really simple but kind of terrifying question. What if everything you think is real isn't? What if it's all just shadows dancing on a wall?
Okay, to get our heads around this, we have to go where Socrates, Plato's teacher, takes us, and that's deep, deep underground, into a cave. He wants us to imagine a pretty grim scene, a world literally made of shadows. So picture this. You've got these prisoners who have lived in this cave their entire lives, since they were babies. And they're not just hanging out, they are chained up. Their necks and ankles are shackled, so they can't move, can't even turn their heads. All they can do their whole life is stare at the wall right in front of them. That wall, that's their whole world. It's everything. So you're probably wondering, where are these shadows coming from? Well, behind the prisoners, there's this big fire blazing. And between the fire and the prisoners, there's a walkway. People, let's call them puppeteers, are walking back and forth, holding up all sorts of objects, little statues of people, animals, you name it. The firelight hits these objects and, bam, cast their shadows onto the wall. It's basically the world's first movie theater, and these guys have a lifetime ticket they can't get rid of. And here's the kicker, the part that really gets you. Socrates points out that for these prisoners, the truth is, well, it's just the shadows. They've never known anything else. So they don't see them as shadows, they see them as real things. They'd give them names, they'd talk about them, they'd probably even get good at predicting which one comes next. They'd think they were geniuses for figuring out the rules of their world. To them, these shadows aren't an illusion, they are reality. Right, so what happens when someone breaks the rules? What if one of these prisoners is suddenly freed? Well, let me tell you, Plato doesn't paint a pretty picture. This journey into the light, it's not a happy-go-lucky escape. It's pure agony. First things first, the physical shock would be brutal. Imagine being chained up your whole life and then suddenly being forced to stand up and turn around. Every muscle would scream in protest. And his eyes? They've only ever known dim light. So even the fire inside the cave would be blindingly painful. The very thing that created his old reality is now a source of agony. And then comes the mental whiplash. Imagine someone shows him one of the actual puppets that was making the shadows. You'd think he'd have an aha moment, right? Nope. He'd be totally confused. He would argue that the shadow, the thing he's known his whole life, was far truer, more real than this weird little object in front of him. It just goes to show how hard we hang on to what's familiar, even when it's a complete illusion. Yeah, this journey to enlightenment is no walk in the park. Socrates is really specific here. He says the prisoner is dragged, against his will, up this rough, steep path, and then yanked out into the full-on sunlight. It's violent, it's painful, and it's completely disorienting. The truth in this story hurts. A lot. So now he's outside, and he's basically landed in a whole new universe. He has to completely relearn how to see, to figure out the difference between the world of appearances and the world of, well, what's actually real. And it's not like he can just open his eyes and see everything perfectly. His mind and his eyes need to adjust. It happens in stages. First, maybe he can only handle looking at shadows on the ground, something familiar. Then he might move on to seeing reflections in a pond. Bit by bit, his eyes get stronger, until he can finally look at the real objects themselves, the trees, the flowers, everything. And then, last of all, when he's finally ready, he can look up and see the sun itself, the source of it all. And this is where the whole allegory clicks into place. What Plato is doing is laying out his whole philosophy. The cave? That's what he calls the visible world. It's everything we see and hear and touch with our senses. It's a world of opinions, of things that change. But the world outside? That's the intelligible world. That's the realm of pure ideas, of truth, of real knowledge that you can only grasp with your mind. So what about the sun? What does that stand for? Well, for Plato, the sun is the biggest idea of them all, the form of the good. Think of it like the ultimate source code for reality. Just like the actual sun gives us light so we can see and gives life to everything, the form of the good is what makes truth and knowledge even possible. It's the final piece of the puzzle. All right, so our guy has made it. He's enlightened. He gets it. You'd think that's the end of the story, right? Roll credits. But for Plato and Socrates, This is where it gets really interesting, because now we have to talk about the burden of knowing the truth and the responsibility that comes with it. Once his eyes have adjusted to the real world, he'd think back to his old life in the cave, and he wouldn't miss it. He'd feel pity for the others. All those little games they played, giving awards for who was best at predicting the next shadow, he'd realize it was all completely pointless. He'd just feel incredibly lucky to be out, and he'd feel sorry for everyone still stuck down there. But what if he goes back down into the cave? Well, the trip back is just as disorienting. Plunging back into the darkness from the bright sun, his eyes would be useless for a while. And here's the crazy part. He would be terrible at their old shadow guessing game. He'd be worse than everyone else because his eyes are now used to reality, not illusions. And the other prisoners? You think they'd welcome him as a hero? Not a chance. They would laugh their heads off at him. They'd point and say, "Look, he went up there and came back with his eyes totally ruined." They'd decide that the journey just isn't worth it. His enlightenment would look like blindness to them. And Socrates adds a chilling little detail. If he tried to set them free, they'd probably kill him for it. And this is the moral of the story, the big takeaway for Plato. The people who get enlightened, the philosophers, they have a duty to go back. It's not about just saving yourself and chilling out in the sunshine. No, a truly just society has to basically force its best and brightest to go back down into the cave. They have to share what they've learned, to care for the others, and to lead. The whole point is to run a society based on what's real, not on a silly shadow puppet show.
Okay, so this story is ancient, right? But honestly, it's never felt more on point than it does today. We all have our own caves, and they're built out of the information we see every single day. So let's see if we can use this old story as a guide for our modern world.
Let's break this down. The shadows on the wall back then, today, that's your curated social media feed. It's the clickbait headlines. They're not the full story, just a projection. And the other prisoners you're chained next to, that's your online echo chamber, where everyone agrees with you and you never hear a different point of view. And what passes for truth in the cave? It's whatever opinion goes viral, whatever dead dogma everyone repeats without thinking. So what's the way out? The true reality? It's doing the hard work, going to original sources, having actual conversations with people who disagree with you, and thinking critically for yourself. And this brings us to what Plato thought education really is. And it's not what you think. It's not about a teacher just pouring facts into your head, like giving sight to someone who's blind. He believed we all have the ability to learn already inside us. Real education is just the art of turning around. It's about turning your whole self away from the shadows and toward the light, toward what's real. So here we are at the end, and we're back to that first question, but now it's got some weight to it. This whole story isn't just a cool thought experiment about some guys in a cave thousands of years ago. It's about you. It's about me. It's a challenge to really look at the walls we're staring at in our own lives. So I'll leave you with this to think about. Which wall are you ready to turn away from?